Ever since this whole George Floyd situation exploded, there have been so many weird posts on the internet against white people. It's cringy, and at the same time, it is disturbing. And these are extremely intense expressions of hatred against white people. It's just pure hatred. And it's not just black people posting like this. There are a lot of white leftists also talking like this. In fact, a lot of the posts that I've seen are coming from white left-wing hipster types, environmentalist, eco-friendly people. And they talk about how we have to purge ourselves of our whiteness. And white people who keep talking about how they want to do something to help black people, there's nothing you can do right now. There is nothing. Get out of our space. You're in our space. This is space that belongs to black and brown people right now. You're not welcomed here right now. The only thing we want you to do is focus how you can purge yourself of your whiteness and of your innate racism, your own weird inclination to racism that's just in every single one of you guys. That's all we ask for you to do right now. Like, there are a lot of posts like this talking about, emptying yourself of your whiteness. Imagine if someone were to say something like, yeah, you should empty yourself of your blackness, or empty yourself of your Middle Easternness. You know what this type of talk reminds me of? After 9/11, there was an explosion of very bizarre stigma against Middle Eastern people. Like, Middle Eastern people were looked upon with suspicion, and a lot of people, when they saw a Middle Eastern guy, suspected that that person was a terrorist. I myself have seen this sort of behavior. It's disturbing. I remember when I was in the 6th grade, or 7th, one of those. It was junior high. I was in junior high, and I was in class, and I got into a debate with a teacher about feminism. Yes, I have been very political. I have been very active in political dialogue pretty much since I was a teenager. And even before that, actually. But I've always been interested in this type of discussion. But I got into this debate about feminism, and later on that day, I was in the classroom, and it was the teacher that I got into an argument with, and then there was another teacher that was there. And the teacher that I got into this debate with began to tell the other teacher about our little argument. And this other teacher, she was a short, fat lady, Democrat too, real liberal. She said to me, go back to the Middle East where they all kill each other. And this is coming out of a liberal Democrat. Feminist, women's rights, SJW type, the whole thing. And she told me that I should go back to the Middle East, go back to where she said, you should go back to where you come from. Well, I'm from Oakland originally. But this was the sort of stigma that erupted after 9/11. And then during the Iraq War, this sort of thing lingered. After every terrorist attack, major terrorist attack done by a Muslim, there is this sort of stigma that intensifies. So it's interesting that these hipsters, these liberal, leftist, whatever you want to call them, they are saying you should purge yourself of your whiteness because you as a white person are inclined to racism. You have a racist inclination that you need to purge yourself from. But it's ironic because these are the same people who would say, hey, don't stigmatize Middle Eastern people and don't stigmatize Muslim people. But yet they are contradicting themselves when they act this way, because when something like with what took place with George Floyd occurs, they'll say, well, it's, white people, racism. They are actually acting like the people who have a knee-jerk reaction against Middle Eastern people every time there's a terrorist attack. So you guys who are talking this way, talking about purging your whiteness, you guys are actually acting like the lunatics who just want to hate on Middle Eastern people after a terrorist attack, as if Middle Eastern people have a inclination towards terrorism. This is the problem with this sort of talk. It opens up a can of worms that justifies other similar behaviors that are very, very dangerous. If you say it's your whiteness that's the problem, because some cops did something and it sparks a whole controversy, then what would happen, let's say, if criminals who are, some black criminals come and they kill somebody because that person's white? Or, there was a case I remember a couple of years ago where a gang of blacks, African Americans, they took a white boy who was mentally handicapped and they physically tortured him and got it on film. And I remember the alt-right kept talking about that story. And what happened to that young man was egregious. But I understood exactly the reason why the alt-right and these fascist racists, I knew the exact reason why they were bringing up this story, because they were using it to justify racism against blacks. The people who keep talking about how they are against whiteness and how white people need to purge themselves of their whiteness and their inclination towards racism, what they may not understand is that they are actually, in a way, indirectly advancing the fascist cause. Now, I'm not talking about being anti-fascist. Like, if you're anti-fascist, if you hate fascism, I hate fascism. I'm anti-fascist. If you hate fascism, then hate fascism. Fascism is extremely deserving of our hatred. If you are going against actual racist, actual eugenist and fascist, all power to you. But if you are going to sit here and obsess over whiteness and point to white people as the problem, then what you are doing, and it doesn't matter how good your intentions are, what you are doing is indirectly advancing the fascist cause. Once you make it about race and ethnicity, and you want to hate on a certain ethnic group, in this case, American whites, American whites are, they're a mixture of different, groups, Polish, Italian, etc. But we don't really look at different European ethnicities. We just all generalize them as white. So that's what I'm going to call them. When you want to focus on white people, you've just made it about an ethnic group. And now the other side, the fascist side, they're going to say, well, we hate blackness. They're going to say, well, we hate this mentality that hates on white people. In fact, they're going to point at your propaganda and they're going to say, this is proof that there is a specific targeting of whites and that there is a conspiracy to organize white genocide. And they're going to look at this entire progressive movement, which is pretty big, and they're going to look at all the rhetoric against white people, and they're going to say, you see, this is proof that there is a plan against white people. They are specifically targeting white people. And what you then do is provoke hysteria. And from that hysteria, you have all sorts of problems. Violence. You have paramilitary activities. You have favoritism towards fascism. You have an increase of popularity towards fascist parties. All of these things arise when you have tension that is provoked by reactionaryism. In this case, you had a situation that took place between Officer Chauvin and his fellow officers and George Floyd. Now, what exactly happened there? I'm not going to make an emphatic conclusion. I'm going to allow the courts to decide that. The problem, though, is that you have a ton of people in the United States who have reacted to the video. They have reacted to the story in a very hysterical way. And what does hysteria provoke? It provokes more hysteria. But that more hysteria is a reaction to your hysteria. And the reaction is worse than that to which the reaction is made. Because when you have a bunch of right-wingers who want to talk about white consciousness, and they want to talk about being focused on their whiteness and being proud of their whiteness, then you have Nazism, essentially. And you're left with an even more dangerous situation. You know, in the last video I did, I talked about police killings and how if you look at the numbers, the whole idea of systematic oppression by the police is nonsense. And the whole idea of how, you know, all cops are bastards is just delusional rhetoric. But these people who talk this way, they make it out as though the current system is what needs to be taken down. Current system needs to be destroyed. And they want to rush us into some weird Joker politics. You know what's worse than the current system? What's worse than the current system would be a political system ran by fascism, or a political system ran by Marxism. And I'm talking communism here. Or a political system ran by a bunch of fanatic anarchists. Because the police force that they would establish would be a complete nightmare. You're talking either the SS or you're talking the Khmer Rouge. So the problem with people who complain about the political system all the time is that they never really care to mention the fact that they are free to criticize the current government. In the fascist regime of Hitler, there was no freedom to criticize the government. Just look at what happened to Sophie Scholl and all of her friends. They all ended up getting beheaded by the guillotine. And yes, the Nazis did use the guillotine just like the French Revolution. And so the people who complain about the current day political system, you know, and another thing that they don't care to mention is that you're always going to have reasons to criticize a government, no matter how comfortable your life is. And yes, Americans are very comfortable in pretty much all spectrums of socioeconomic status. I mean, people who are technically poor in America are a lot more comfortable than people living in India or people living in Guatemala. But you're always going to have reasons to criticize the government, no matter how comfortable your life is. The problem is that you criticize the government so much so that eventually you have a revolution. And what you end up with is a system that you can't criticize, because if you do, you end up with a bullet in your head. So we have to look at the current situation and count our blessings. It's not that bad. What would be worse would be a government ran by either far-left anarchists and or Marxist or National Socialists. Anyway, just giving you guys some of my thoughts on this subject. Hope you guys have enjoyed the video. Hope you guys have learned something. I hope I've made you guys think in some little way. You guys just heard some theology. God bless.